date, a tense conversation was currently taking place between a man and a woman. The lady with pink hair nervously put the cup with barely sipped tea on the saucer and was very nervous, not daring to look up. After all, sitting in front of her, glaring at her, was Duke Cassius Adelhart himself. And although the girl tried to look friendly, she understood that the Duke looked at her as his worst enemy, and he was, to some extent, right. "So, what made you come here without warning?" Red Eyes stared at her. She clasped her hands nervously in her lap, but tried her best to collect her thoughts. "Your Grace." The girl finally dared to raise her blue eyes to him. "I want to break off our engagement." Her words sounded firm. The man twitched nervously, but tried to maintain his composure. And then he asked if she understood what she was talking about. "You know that neither of us wants this fictitious marriage," was her answer. "It all happened a week ago. The road, the bright light, the loud sound, and the impact. A scarlet puddle was spreading across the asphalt, a broken phone was lying nearby, and people around were screaming. It all started with an accident. After some time, she opened her eyes with difficulty and saw an unfamiliar environment around her. When she woke up, she realized that she was in a completely different world. Moreover, the sensations of her own body were unusual, and she immediately rushed to the mirror. Seeing the reflection, she experienced an indescribable range of emotions. Reborn into the world of a fantasy novel, as usually happens in books, she became none other than Ibelia Barnine. Ibelia Barnine was a heroine of a book with a very difficult fate. By marrying Cassis, she became Lucius's stepmother, a terribly treacherous and unimaginably cruel stepmother. Like her stepson, Ibelia was an illegitimate child. But unlike her, everyone in the duchy loved Lucius and cared for him. Ibelia was simply consumed with jealousy. She believed that the child was obliged to go through the same pain that she did, and she resorted to physical abuse against Lucius. Caught red-handed, Ibelia was thrown out into the streets, where she contracted some disease and later met her death in a monastery. And she, Seo Yun-han, was one of those readers who was delighted that the villain got what she deserved. She's far from the only commentator, so why did she end up in her body? Well, at any rate, Ibelia has not yet married Cassis. It is easier to cut off the ends now than after marriage. She is willing to do a lot in order to survive. She is even ready to be nice to young Lucius, but that is not her main problem. The biggest problem is Cassius Adelhart. She doesn't want to marry someone who despises her, and she doesn't need his wealth, because it will turn her life into hell. Lost in thought, the girl reached the right room and made a firm decision. Yes, she will break up with Cassis and build her own life. She will change the course of the original story. "Is this what you want yourself, or the whim of Count Barnane?" the man asked after listening to Ibelia, to which she replied that her father was not aware. The Duke rose from his seat, announcing that, in that case, the conversation was over. "I'll pretend this conversation never happened. Look at yourself from the outside," the man added, but Ibelia didn't give up. In an effort to stop him, the girl grabbed the Duke's hand, but he instantly pulled it away, his expression at that moment quite irritated. Ibelia expected such a reaction, but tried to answer calmly and without emotion. She knows why he agreed to marry her, the illegitimate daughter of a count. Ibelia is sure that her father offered to marry her in exchange for silence. Technically, it was more like a threat. "Since you know, then why do you still want to break off the engagement?" Cassis became seriously angry. But the girl promised to provide him with all the necessary information, and in return asked him to break off their engagement. "How did you get this information?" The Duke was taken aback. But the girl replied that she couldn't tell him that, and mentally added that it would be strange to answer that she had read about it in a book, but she assured him that there had been no leak. "Only my father and I know about this, so what do you say?" Your Highness Ibelia waited for an answer. The man was silent, and then, sighing heavily, he replied that he would think about it, and now she could go. Having said goodbye, Ibelia Barnane, maintaining her dignity, left the room and headed towards the exit. However, despite everything, it was rather rude of him not to see her off. Lost in her thoughts, the girl sighed tiredly, and then heard someone call her. "Lady Barnane, if you don't mind," began a quiet, thin voice. Right in front of her stood a boy with dark hair and big red eyes, looking pleading. The moment she saw him, Ibelia realized that this child was Lucius. However, the fact that the boy asked to join him for tea surprised her greatly. The nurse, who was following the young gentleman, remarked that he should first greet the lady, and Lucius remembered his mistake as he was about to introduce himself. "Hello, young Mr. Adelhart." The girl greeted him with a smile, inadvertently interrupting him. But the child was not upset, but only opened his eyes in surprise. It was the first time he had been greeted like that, and he thought that this girl was not like everyone else. And when he looked up at her, he asked in surprise if she really knew him, to which Abelia replied that it was hard not to recognize him, because he was a copy of the Duke. "As you already know, I am Abelia Barnane," the girl introduced herself and curtsied. "As for tea drinking," she thought without finishing her sentence, "if she agrees, Lucius will begin to hope that she will become a stepmother." And even now, the boy looked at her with such hope in his eyes. She would still have to do it. "I beg your pardon, young master, but I cannot agree to this," Abelia answered nevertheless. Deciding that this was better than giving him false hope before breaking off the engagement, the girl replied that since she was engaged, she did not think she could accept his proposal. Lucius immediately wilted and his hands began to tremble slightly. The boy asked for forgiveness for being so rude. However, the girl hastened to assure him that it was her fault, and also added that she was forced to leave and said goodbye to the young gentleman. Lucius Adelhart, the sole heir of Duke Cassius Adelhart, remained standing where he was, watching as Abelia Barnane walked away towards the exit. Lucius Adelhart is the illegitimate son of Cassius Adelhart. In the original, he was cold-blooded just like his father, a man capable of killing without a shred of regret. This is how Lucius spent his childhood, all alone in this cruel world full of human indifference. One day, Cassius Adelhart declared Lucius his heir in front of the entire council. "What are you saying, Duke? You must choose a duchess who will give birth to a legitimate successor?" The advisors intervened, not understanding how an illegitimate child, and a commoner at that, could become the heir to the ducal family. One of those present even said that he understood his concern for the young master, but if he had a legitimate heir, he would very soon change his mind. The Duke did not listen to their indignation for long and ordered everyone to be silent. "This is my decision. Anyone who tries to challenge it will lose their head," the man said coldly. He was determined to give Lucius everything that was due to him by birthright. "If that's all, you can go free," he informed everyone present and rose from his seat. The man was determined and was not going to listen to anyone's objections. Opening the door, he walked out of the negotiation room, still maintaining his stern face, even when he saw that rose petals were scattered in front of the door. At this moment, Lucius was already running away from the opened door straight into the garden. He hid behind one of the columns, holding fresh white rosebuds in his hands and thinking about what he had heard. But his thoughts were interrupted by women's conversations that reached him from the garden. Perhaps the young master's mother was a commoner, if not worse, discussed the women at the table, the wives of the Duke's advisors. Knowing the Duke, he would have married even a fallen noblewoman, but the fact that he accepted only the young master means a lot, the gossips continued. Could it be that the young gentleman's mother's status was even lower than that of a commoner, they concluded. Then one of the lamas suggested that if she were the Duke's wife, she would send this child to a boarding school. Another added that it was too sweet of her. If she had been the Duke's wife, the child would have ended up in a monastery long ago. In this harsh reality, Lucius dreamed of only one thing. Every night before going to bed, the boy prayed to all the gods he knew. "Please let me have a mother." The child's desire was so great. Abelia Barnane returned home after her trip to the estate of Count Barnane. The coachman reported that they were there and helped the lady out of the carriage. The girl couldn't get the image of Lucius out of her head. It looked like he was crying. Maybe she should have agreed at least once. One tea party wasn't so bad. If she weren't in Abelia's body, she could take better care of Lucius. "No, what am I thinking about?" She immediately pulled herself up short. After all, in this situation, she can only break off the engagement and live her own life. As soon as the girl entered the house, she was already greeted with the question of where she had been. In fact, she was already tired of this whole situation. Besides, this person shouldn't have been in the mansion. "I'm asking where you were." Derek Barnane, Abelia's half-brother, was eager to hear her answer. The girl closed her eyes. Did he really go all this way just to anger her? How sweet, if you think about it. Abelia is also a victim. Abelia's mother was a servant in the Barnane's house. She was incredibly beautiful, so one day she attracted the attention of the Count. And soon a pink-haired baby girl, Abelia, was born. Fearing abuse at the mansion, Abelia's mother fled but soon after fell ill with the plague. Worried that her daughter would be left alone, she turned to the Count. However, upon receiving the letter, he was not at all happy about such news. Crumpling the letter in his hands, he promised himself to kill them both. And soon he was already heading to the house where Ibelia and her mother lived, with the intention of doing what he had planned, but until he met his daughter. Having carefully examined the girl, he realized that this child was very similar to her mother and could fetch a high price on the marriage market. Little Ibelia, frightened all this time, sat right in front of the Count, awaiting her future fate. And the man gave her a choice: she would go with him or stay here, and if she went with him, he would help her mother. Ibelia, who essentially had no choice, became a hostage of this mansion. The anger of the Earl's second son, Derek, was especially always directed at Ibelia. As she walked up the stairs, she thought that she wanted today to be a quiet day. However, her wish was not destined to come true, and soon she was roughly grabbed by the arm. "Are you crazy? You're ignoring me now," Derek said indignantly. But Ibelia replied that she had nothing to say to him, so let him pass. She was a little tired today. However, the man became seriously angry and was indignant at the way she was talking to him, to which the girl replied that he should call her sister. "You are only so brave because of your engagement to Duke Adelhart, but that doesn't change anything," the young man said angrily. Ibelia countered that on the contrary, if she married the Duke, she would become one of the 3 duchesses of the Empire. And he, who had not even managed to obtain the title of Count, but she did not have time to finish, because in an instant she saw a flash of rage in Derek's eyes, and she felt herself being pulled back, down the high stairs. Letting go of her hand, young Barnon pushed the girl down with both hands. The first thing she saw when she opened her eyes was the chandelier in her room. Consciousness gradually returned, and lying in bed, Ibelia remembered that she had definitely fallen down the stairs, but she did not understand what exactly had happened. At that moment, her maid entered the room and asked if everything was all right with her mistress, and if she was hurt. And when the girl replied that her body was a little sore, Ibelia's personal maid, Annie, sympathetically told her that young Master Derek had pushed her down the stairs. Derek, what a bastard, Ibelia thought, but she couldn't do anything about it. The maid gave her some painkillers and added that the doctor told her to rest. Annie also handed the lady a sealed envelope with a seal bearing the coat of arms of the Adelhart family land. The girl took it but was surprised why the Adelharts would write to her. "Lady Ibelia, hello, this is Lucius," the letter began. "The teacher said that in order to invite someone to visit you need an invitation. This time I will prepare even more delicacies for tea. You will come? I will wait for you." So wrote young Mr. Adelhart. Ibelia was reading this letter carefully when she noticed that a few drops had fallen on it, and she realized with surprise that these were her tears and that she was crying. But why is she crying? Perhaps it reminded her of her own story. For her, who grew up without a mother, Lucius's feelings were more understandable than anyone else. Her father's woman also appeared in her life. She always tried her best to be kind to the girl and showered her with gifts. The appearance of her stepmother in her life was like a dream. Every day she dreamed that they would become a happy family. Well, that's in the past, as one day little Seo Yoon heard her father's wife suggesting that she be given to her relatives. After all, one day a second child will be born, and she will not be able to take care of both of them alone. Or she suggested sending her to a boarding school, because she heard that these days they have all the amenities. Because she knows how painful it is, she doesn't want to give little Lucius false hope. Ibelia wrote a reply, sealed the envelope, and handed it to the maid, instructing her to send it to the Adelharts. When the maid left on her mistress's errand, the girl sighed slightly and relaxed in her chair, indulging in her thoughts. Either way, no matter what happened yesterday, Derek is a complete bastard. He was definitely deliberately mocking her. And first of all, Ibelia must take revenge on Derek and only then break off the engagement with Cassis. But even if she manages to break off the engagement, Count Barnen will not give up trying to marry her off, so Ibelia must escape from the Count's estate as far as possible. Thinking like this, she put on a long cloak. The girl realized that she would need money and something else. And for the latter, she needs to find an information guild, which she will do right now. Meanwhile, life went on as usual at the Adelhart mansion. Lucius held the letter in his hands and happily told the nanny that a reply had arrived from Ibelia. The woman was sincerely happy to see her pupil's joy and offered to read it, but the boy wanted to read it himself. "I hope you are in good health. Thank you for your repeated invitation to tea. Unfortunately, I have to decline, because I have no free time at all." This was Ibelia's answer to the young gentleman, and the more Lucius read, the sadder he became. And finally, he asked the nanny if it was possible that it was all because of his origin, and that was why his father and Ibelia did not like him, and that was why they were breaking off the engagement. The woman hastened to assure the boy that the Duke valued him very much, but Lucius was not convinced by her words, because in his heart he felt guilty. "Nanny, do you think I can convince her?" Hope flashed in the child's voice, and the nanny confirmed it. "Then I need to prepare a gift for Lady Ibelia," Lucius rejoiced. "After all, everyone loves gifts, and maybe if she likes it, she'll change her mind." "Yes, let's try," the nanny agreed, but it hurt her to watch how the boy wanted with all his might to be loved. Meanwhile, Ibelia had gotten out into the city and was wandering the streets in search of the right house. "Young master, please take your time." She heard a voice nearby and recognized it. Lucius, inspired, ran and at the same time urged the nanny to hurry after him, which turned out to be a mistake the next moment. The sound of a dull fall echoed through the crowded street, followed by the worried cries of women passing by, which Ibelia tried her best to ignore. It couldn't stop her from moving on. Just move on, she told herself. I can't help myself." Just a second later, the girl turned around and headed towards Lucius. Lucius sat on the ground and bitter tears welled up in the boy's eyes. "Young master, you are not hurt?" Ibelia hurried towards him, removing the hood from her head as she went. Lucius's eyes widened in surprise when he saw Lady Barnaine standing in front of him. The girl asked him to get up because the ground was cold, and also suggested that he return to the estate for examination by the doctor. "No, I came to buy a gift for you." The boy refused without thinking. However, the lady insisted that in such a situation, the gift was not the most important thing, and his health was much more important. Realizing that she showed concern for him, Lucius blushed. "Then come with me, Lady Ibelia," the young gentleman invited the girl again. And he still really wants to invite Lady Ibelia to tea. And the girl could not resist such persistence of the young master Adelhart. There were all kinds of cakes, cookies, candies, and other sweets on the table. Looking at all this abundance, Ibelia thought only that she had no time for such things. However, at that moment, Lucius offered the lady to try another sweet, and the girl agreed with a smile. "By the way, young master, why did you want to invite me to tea today?" she asked. The boy was very embarrassed and did not dare to answer, but still asked if she could become his mother. At first, Ibelia was taken aback by such a frank question, unable to squeeze out a word. And although she sincerely understood his feelings, she was forced to apologize, saying that she could not be his mother, from which Lucius assumed that this was because he was an illegitimate child. That's not the point. The girl was trapped, and she really didn't want to offend or upset the child. Luckily for her, at that moment the Duke came out onto the terrace and sternly asked what she was doing there. Lucius let out a frightened gasp and stared at his father with his big eyes. And the girl thought with understanding that such a reaction was exactly in the spirit of the Duke. The reason Ibelia can't be left alone with Lucius is the secret that got the Duke cornered by Count Barnaine. And it lies in the fact that Lucius is not Cassis's biological child. There is one name that must not be mentioned in the Adelhart estate. And this is the name of the eldest daughter of the late Duke Adelhart and sister of Cassis, Julia Adelhart. For Cassis, who was abused by his father under the pretext of preparing to inherit the title, she would be the only outlet. Julia was the only one he could call his family, and only his older sister always said that Cassis was not guilty of anything, and he should not worry. But over time, fate separated them, and they entered different academies. And so, over time, the boy came to his senses and showed unprecedented fortitude. He was especially pleased with the thought that now Julia could escape from her father. But one day he returned home and found his sister in a very bad condition. "Julia, what the hell happened?" he asked his sister, who was crying in the middle of a destroyed room with traces of blood. "It was my father who did this," Lucius asked in a low voice, but his sister did not answer, because everything was clear without words. The endless violence against Julia, who became pregnant without knowing the father of the child, and Cassis, who knew the truth, always protected Julia from the Duke. Still a teenager himself, the future Duke was very worried about his older sister. And she lit up the world around him with her smile, thanking her younger brother for protecting her and her child. Julia died due to complications during childbirth. Cassis was wary of the ridicule of his sister, who died giving birth to an illegitimate child. And so, taking on the burden of condemnation from those around him, he accepted her child, Lucius, as his own son, and then set about searching for his biological father. A year ago, something happened at the Adelhart estate that made him very worried about the boy. The doctor who was called reported that the young gentleman had suddenly had a seizure, but Cassis did not understand what was happening. Everyone was especially worried about the strange flaming symbol on the chest of the exhausted Lucius. The doctor explained that the young gentleman did not just have a fever, but must have an innate curse that manifested itself in the form of a symbol, and it seemed to be passed down in the family. After the doctor asked the Duke if he had any ideas about this, Cassis looked through all the books in the library in search of an answer. Having found nothing, the Duke angrily thought that it was definitely from Lucius's biological father. There could be no other option. Time passed inexorably, and finding information about the curse became increasingly difficult. And one day, Count Barnen showed up at the estate, claiming that he could be very useful to the Duke. "It's about Lucius's biological parents," he told Cassis with a nasty smile. However, Duke Adelhart had no intention of playing games and asked him again what he meant, since Lucius was his own son. Cassis had no intention of revealing his secret to anyone, especially to such a slippery type as Count Barnen. However, when he revealed that Lucius's biological mother was his older sister, Julia Adelhart, it was as if a stone had been placed on the Duke's shoulders. "And the owner of such platinum hair is Lucius's own father," added Count Barnen, shaking a small envelope. "And while we're on the subject, he has a business proposal for the Duke. If you take my daughter Ibelia as your wife, I will keep everything a secret." It sounded like an open threat of blackmail. But if Duke Adelhart refuses, then the whole public will know about this secret. And since Ibelia asks for a divorce in exchange for information about Lucius's real father, it is only natural that Cassis is wary of their meetings. "Father, Ibelia has nothing to do with this. I invited her to us." The boy tried to explain everything to the Duke, but he sent his son to his room. Lucius didn't want to do this and kept trying to protect Lady Barnen. However, Ibelia herself asked the young master to listen, since she needed to talk to the Duke. When they were alone, Cassis asked the reason for her visit, to which the girl replied that she had met the young gentleman by chance in the market and had simply accepted his invitation to tea. "It seems I have spoiled the Duke's mood. If you are uncomfortable, I will leave right now." Ibelia stood up, and at that moment the sleeve of her dress was pulled up, revealing the bruises on the girl's wrist. The dark spots on her delicate skin did not go unnoticed by the Duke, and then he acted on emotions. The man instantly blocked her path, not allowing her to escape. Where did these wounds come from? They were inflicted by Count Barnen. He firmly but carefully grabbed Ibelia's hand, demanding an answer. And when the girl sheepishly replied that this was not so, he assumed that it was the work of her brothers. "Duke, this is not something to worry about while we are in the process of breaking off the engagement," the girl tried to reason with him. But the man objected that this was precisely what he had to worry about, since he had not yet agreed to break off the engagement. And since the lady is his fiancée, he believes that he has the right to ask questions of his fiancée. Ibelia thought that in fact he did not consider her his bride. But she answered out loud that these were just scratches from yesterday's fall down the stairs and asked to let her go. Reluctantly, Cassis let go of her hand and said that he would prepare a carriage for her. Soon he was already hurrying down the corridor and thinking about the current situation. The man's body was tense, and at first he walked too fast, but at some point he stopped abruptly. "Logan, find out how Lady Ibelia is treated at the mansion," he ordered his assistant. He still couldn't forget the wounds on her hands, because they looked like traces of violence. And if his suspicions turn out to be true, then he won't be able to leave everything as is. The ducal carriage drove calmly through the forest, carrying the guest on the orders of Duke Adelhart. Ibelia asked the coachman to drop her off at Courtney Street, but the servant explained that he had orders to take her to the Barnen estate. "There is one unfinished business, please. Just this once," the girl asked sincerely. Soon they arrived at the above-mentioned street, which the coachman informed the lady about. Entering one of the buildings, the girl thought that this was the very place. She slowly closed the door behind her and walked to the bar at the opposite end of the room. Ibelia gently rapped her fist on the table 3 times and spoke her prepared sentence. "1 cent, please, with lemon and ice." the girl said with a smile. Ascent is a cocktail popular throughout the empire. However, in this tavern, Ascent is the secret code of the Sierra Information Guild. The young man behind the counter asked her if she knew the meaning of this phrase, and the girl confirmed it with a smile. Knocking on the table 3 times and asking for an ascent with lemon and ice was the code for requesting a meeting with the leader of Sierra. 13 years after Cassis's death, the significant events of this work took place. Cassis's son found a portrait of Julia Adelhart in a secret room. Lucius, having learned the truth about his origins, decided that Cassis had betrayed him. He began exchanging information with Sierra, establishing a close relationship with its leader, Samuel Denoa. But the main reason for Ibelia's desire to hire them is a completely different fact, that by accepting the guild's strict policy of exchanging information for information, she would sign a contract with it. And using everything she knows, convincing Samuel will definitely not be difficult for her. "I've contacted the leader, so please wait a bit," the young man said after leading the lady into the inner room. He also offered her a drink while she waited, and the girl gratefully accepted the glass. However, before taking a sip, she looked carefully at the young man standing in front of her. He looked quite ordinary, but the smell coming from him was impossible to ignore. Something like this is hard to come by for anyone, no matter how rich they are. The soothing scent of Lizer herbs. "What are you doing?" the young man said in fear after the girl suddenly grabbed his hand. Ibelia replied that she had no reason to continue waiting, because the leader of the Sierra, Sir Samuel, is already in this room. The young man, although surprised, calmly asked how she found out about this. "They say that Sir Samuel's younger sister is very ill, so she constantly burns the herb Lizera, which acts as a sedative, and you also smell of it," explained Ibelia. "And the ring on his index finger is an artifact that allows him to change his appearance." For a few moments, the young man looked at the girl in surprise and then laughed cheerfully, saying that it was very exciting. "I think you're worthy of my attention." Samuel twirled the ring on his finger. And at that moment, his hair changed color, his facial features were transformed. Samuel, the leader of Sierra, smiled dazzlingly and asked what the lady wanted. Ibelia put a heavy bag of money on the table and asked to borrow this artifact. In addition, she needed help in finding a woman who works as a doctor. She has red hair and green eyes. Lives most likely in the capital or somewhere nearby. Her name is Erin Lawner. When the young man asked about the payment, the lady pushed the bag towards him, noting that it was enough to cover the cost of finding a doctor, but she also planned to continue working with Sierra in the future. "As a reward for this, I will tell you how to cure your sister," Ibelia smiled. The lady's last words left Samuel speechless. For 7 years, since Arya was born, they couldn't find anything, so how could the lady know the solution? The book is called Arya of Light. In other words, Samuel's younger sister, Arya, is the main character. She was fragile but kind. Lucius, who grew up distrusting people after the betrayal of Ibelia and Cassis, was touched by Arya's kindness. And the powerful divine power that was consuming her was the only light that could heal Lucius's curse. "Try making some Talana flower syrup for your sister. It grows in the kingdom of Cessia and helps restore strength," the girl added. But Samuel doubted why he should believe her, to which Ibelia pointed out that it was up to him to decide whether the information was reliable. And until the data on the Talana flower is verified, he will not be able to offer the lady any other information. Ibelia understood everything, but it was still in his interests to find a doctor as soon as possible. If she helps Erin create a cure for Arya, it will make the deal with Samuel a lot easier. "Okay, anything else?" asked the young man. Smiling dazzlingly, the girl replied that there was something else she wanted to ask. Ibelia returned home when it was already completely dark. As she entered her room, she thanked God that she had not been caught. And just a moment later, the maid informed the lady that it was time for dinner, and the girl replied that she was already on her way. "You are late, Ibelia." The whole family, led by Count Barnain, gathered in the dining room. Looking at her so-called father, the girl noted that he looked much more cruel than she expected. The man noticed her gaze and asked what she was looking at. Ibelia replied that she was just lost in thought. The dinner continued in silence, and the plates on the table became empty. Ibelia also silently picked at her plate with cutlery. "Ibelia," the Count called, finishing his food and wiping his mouth with a napkin. The girl froze in surprise, not even bringing her fork to her mouth. I heard that you visited the Adelhard estate yesterday without telling me why you went there. The question was asked in a chilling tone. However, the girl was not at all embarrassed, and calmly put down the cutlery. Now a lie would have been the best choice, but the circumstances had changed somewhat. And so Ibelia confidently replied that she had asked the Duke to break off the engagement. What did you say? The Count managed to ask with difficulty after the deathly silence that had settled in the room. I spoke with the Duke about breaking off the engagement. I thought I would tell you at the right time, the girl explained with a smile. But she didn't have time to finish because events unfolded too quickly. In an instant, Count Barnane was at her side and gave his daughter a resounding slap in the face. "Ibelia, not testing my patience," the man said angrily, radiating rage. As he left the dining room, he announced that he would speak to Duke Adelhart, warning her not to dare to mention breaking off the engagement again. "Remember this," the Count said firmly, without even looking at his daughter. When the door closed behind the head of the family, Ibelia rose from her seat, intending to leave, but was stopped by her brother's question if she had gone mad. The girl, whose cheek was flushed and sore, looked at the speaker completely emotionlessly. "You have nothing more to say?" she asked her question in response. But Derek didn't understand what she wanted to hear from him. "Maybe he'll apologize or ask if I'm okay," Ibelia explained. However, the young man only smiled maliciously at her words. He didn't consider himself guilty of anything. Besides, she had been talking nonsense lately, and she should stop interfering with the family's affairs and not be seen. "That is, you are not going to apologize," the girl stated. "I will never ask you for forgiveness in my life," Derek said, approaching his sister. And while he stood close to her, spewing anger, Ibelia quietly poured some liquid from a small bottle onto his feet. She had assumed that nothing good could be expected from him, so she was prepared. Derek had a chance to apologize to her, but he missed it. Earlier, Ibelia had told Samuel that there was someone she wished to push down the stairs, but only to injure him slightly. "Of all the requests we receive, this is the most restrained one," the young man noted. But nevertheless, the prospect of hurting someone still worried the girl. Soon, a smiling Samuel was handing her a small bottle of sparkling liquid. Still feeling a little uneasy, Ibelia sighed tiredly, wanting to leave this place as soon as possible. Meanwhile, important matters were also being decided at the Adelhard estate. Cassis's assistant provided the gentleman with the results of a small investigation at his request. Although the Count puts on a show of caring for Lady Barnane, he often neglects her at home. Moreover, even the Countess seems to mock her, using the lessons as a reason for hunger strikes and other restrictions. However, when the Duke asked about physical violence, the assistant replied that there was no such thing. Cassis thought about it, because it was hard to believe. If these were not signs of violence, then where did the wounds on her wrist come from? "I will visit the Barnane estate," the Duke announced, surprising his assistant with his suddenness. But Cassis was serious about checking something out for himself. The ducal carriage sped along the road towards the Barnane family mansion. The whole way, the Duke was absorbed in his own thoughts and reflections. It seemed he was on his way to save his fiancée from her family's abuse. But what if she says that she was not bullied? What will happen then? The man slightly regretted his actions, that he gave in to emotions without thinking at all. In fact, the cold-blooded Cassis Adelhart doesn't recognize himself at all. The arrival of Duke Adelhart caused quite a stir among the servants of the Barnane mansion. The butler tried to stop his lordship, assuring him that Lady Barnane was not well at the moment and offering to visit her at another time. But Cassis did not believe a single word of the servant, because only yesterday Ibelia was completely healthy, not counting the bruises on her wrists. That's why he categorically refused to leave, which left the servant dumbfounded. "I must see Lady Barnane at once." The man's tone brooked no objection. Ibelia sat in her room in front of a large mirror. A large red spot blossomed on the woman's delicate face, which stung mercilessly. However, the girl was not even almost upset. To some extent. She received a small moral compensation. A little earlier, the maid reported that young Master Derek had fallen down the stairs. "What? He's not wounded?" Ibelia asked, feigning but quite lively. Annie replied that he had only broken his leg, worrying that the lady had recently fallen down the stairs. Gloating in her heart, the lady smiled faintly. "Well, it's probably just bad timing," she tried to reassure the maid. At least, Ibelia wouldn't have to see Derek for a while, which wasn't such a bad thing. Stretching out tiredly on the bed, the girl thought about whether she should rest for a day, pretending to be sick. But for some reason, as soon as she thought about rest, there was an insistent knock at the door. Lamenting that she would never be able to rest, the girl got out of bed and allowed the knocker to enter. "Madam, you have a visitor," a worried maid burst into the room. Ibelia was surprised by the visitor, but she was even more surprised by the maid's reaction. Was she really making so much noise because of an ordinary visitor, to which the girl tried to justify herself by saying that this was an unusual visitor? Duke Adelhart walked confidently into the house. Despite all the attempts of the servants to stop him, he intends to see his bride today. Ibelia was incredibly surprised when she heard that her uninvited guest was Duke Adelhart, and he came completely without warning. Perhaps he came to give her an answer to the proposal to break off the engagement. The girl thoughtfully lightly touched her red cheek. But how can she meet him like this? Ibelia asked the maid to tell the Duke that she was not feeling well and to ask him to come back another time. The maid rushed to carry out her mistress's instructions, but returned after a while with an expression of horror on her face. "The Duke wants to meet the lady today no matter what. He will wait for her in the reception room." Having said this, Annie exhaled tiredly, and the girl realized that she had no other choice. Well, nothing can be done. Having said this, Ibelia got up from the bed, asking Annie to help her get ready. For the next half hour, the maid helped her mistress with her hair and makeup. Everything was ready, but the maid was worried that they had not managed to do anything about the mark from the blow, because it was impossible not to notice it. Ibelia looked closely at her reflection in the mirror. A beautiful girl with a red spot on her cheek was looking at her. Annie kept complaining that if the Duke saw this, they would be in deep trouble. Ibelia interrupted the girl's lamentations and asked her for one favor. She asked for the widest-brimmed hat available, as a plan had formed in her head. Soon Lady Barnane, wearing a wide-brimmed hat, walked confidently along the corridors of the mansion. She didn't have time to reach the guest room as her path was blocked. "Madam, I think you had better return to your room." The family butler stood before her, bowing respectfully. But Ibelia replied that Duke Adelhart was waiting for her, to which the butler explained that the Countess was already talking to him. Hearing this, Ibelia froze in bewilderment, wondering if the Countess herself had really condescended to talk. Is she really speaking to the Duke herself? But if so, then perhaps everything is for the best. "I'm not going to go back," the girl said confidently, adding that she couldn't make his lordship wait any longer. Soon she was approaching the doors of the guest room, which were slightly open. "Your Grace, as I have already said, Ibelia is not well now," the stepmother's voice was heard. The woman insisted that the Duke visit his bride at another time. Standing on the threshold of the room, the girl realized that Countess Barnane wanted to preserve her reputation at all costs, because if Ibelia appeared in such a form, she would destroy the image of a magnanimous wife that she had built. Hearing approaching footsteps, the woman sternly exclaimed that she had ordered not to let anyone in. Ibelia entered the room with a smile, anticipating the look on her face. As soon as the Countess saw her, her face was distorted with anger, but at the same time horror could be seen in her eyes. But the Duke was slightly displeased that the girl had only just arrived, to which Ibelia apologized, replying that she needed time to get herself together since his visit had happened so suddenly. And only after a few seconds did the Duke carefully examine the girl. "By the way, why are you wearing a weekend hat?" he asked the girl while she was fidgeting, covering her face with her hat. Realizing that something was wrong, the man stepped towards the girl and with one movement removed her hat from her head. The now unnecessary female accessory ended up lying on the floor. "This is also a wound from a fall?" he asked the stunned girl, already knowing the answer to his question. Countess Barnane was trying to explain that Ibelia was a little clumsy, but the Duke asked her to speak for herself and again asked Ibelia if it was a wound from a fall. "What kind of a man is he?" the girl thought, looking at Cassis. Could he really be so angry about this? "This is a trace of someone's blow," the Duke finished his question, his face darkening. He reached out and carefully took the girl's face, trying to get a closer look. No matter how you look at it, her wound can't possibly be the result of a fall. "Who was it who dared to raise his hand against my bride?" Duke Adelhart turned to Countess Barnane. The woman literally shuddered with fear and began to swear in a stuttering voice that she had not beaten her. At this time, Ibelia assured the Duke that her wound was not so serious. But Cassis did not want to listen to any excuses. He made his own conclusions about what was happening here. I will not allow my future wife to be in such a place. From now on, the lady will live in my mansion, he said, not tolerating objections. Ibelia, who had not expected such a turn of events, only cried out in surprise. And the girl's surprise even increased after the man carefully but firmly took her hand. Walking towards the exit, Cassis did not let go of her hand for a second, leading the girl behind him. Lady Barnane and Duke Adelhart left the Barnane mansion. Thus, the man and woman found themselves in a carriage on the way to the Adelhart estate. Ibelia was unable to come to her senses immediately, but when she did, she indignantly asked the Duke what he was doing. "And you, young lady?" the man returned her question. She was being treated so terribly at home, so why did she ask for the engagement to be broken off instead of asking for help? To which the girl replied that it didn't matter how she was being treated there, and he shouldn't worry about it. "Or are you doing this to make me break off the engagement?" he asked the next question. And since that was the case, Duke Adelhart said that he would answer her about this today. Since they are engaged, the young lady belongs to him, so he cannot dissolve it. Besides, he thinks he has the right to interfere in her personal affairs, again for this reason. However, Ibelia was indignant at why he was acting so suddenly. "I already told you," the man repeated, leaning closer to her. "They are engaged, so she belongs to him." However, the girl did not understand. He did not want to marry her. Cassis had nothing to say to this. In fact, he himself did not understand the reasons for his actions. "I'm not going to force you, but for now, stay at the Adelhart mansion for a while," he finally answered, not looking at her. And when Ibelia asked why he was so worried, Cassis replied that anyone in his place would have done the same thing after seeing what the Barnine family did to her. Besides, he can't send his bride to another place, so it would be better if she lived in their mansion. Soon they returned to the Adelhart mansion, where no one was waiting for them. But still, the butler, together with all the servants, greeted Lady Ibelia. The butler introduced himself as the manager of the Adelhart mansion. The Duke said that the lady would stay here for some time, and asked that she be taken care of so that she would not want for anything. Following the master's order, the manager led the girl to her room, informing her that she would live there. He also invited the Adelhart family doctor to examine her wounds. Embarrassed, Ibelia tried to refuse any help. But even the doctor replied that this was the master's order, and he could not disobey it. The girl thought that if Cassis found out that she refused to be examined, she would get angry again. And she had to agree, even though she didn't want to at all. After examining and treating her wounds, the doctor bandaged the girl's wrist, and finally everything was finished. "It must have been very painful for you. Do you have any other complaints?" the man asked sympathetically. To which the girl replied that she was now fine and had no more wounds, and the doctor was very glad to hear this, and added that if she needed anything, she should not hesitate to contact him. Finally, when the girl was left alone in the room, she was able to think about what she should do now. She doesn't know what kind of world is out there, so it's dangerous to leave here without a plan. She wanted to make money by collaborating with Samuel and get out of the Barnane mansion. All her hopes for such a development of events disappeared in an instant. Besides, if she left, would they be able to find a good mother for Lucius? That was what worried her. And the problem with the heir had not yet been resolved, which only added to the anxiety. And since she told Cassis about Lucius's father, she also needed to make sure that the curse would be lifted from him. But are such reasons enough for an unmarried woman to remain in a mansion where only a man and a child live? Her thoughts were interrupted by an insistent knock on the door, and the girl allowed her to enter. The door opened and Lucius appeared behind it, his look quite worried. "Lady Ibelia, what happened to your cheek?" the boy asked anxiously. Having answered that nothing terrible had happened to her, the girl asked what the young gentleman was doing there. Lucius replied that he was going for a walk and would like her to come with him. The tone in which the young gentleman uttered his request made the lady very sad and made her heart soften a little. Realizing that the girl had been silent for too long, Lucius repeated his request, asking if she would like to go for a walk with him. "Okay, young master," the girl finally answered with a smile. It wasn't long before Ibelia and the young master Adelhart were leisurely strolling through the green, blooming garden. Ibelia was in a good mood, and she noticed everything around her with delight, especially focusing on such a plant as clover. Lucius, hearing this name, did not understand what she was talking about and thought that the lady meant hairgrass. Ibelia explained that this plant usually has 3 leaves, but sometimes you come across a 4-leaf clover, and they say that if you find one, your deepest wish will come true. "Have you ever found a four-leaf clover, Lady Abelia?" the boy asked her. To which the girl replied that no, although she tried several times, she still couldn't find it. Then the young gentleman asked what wish she would like to make, and the girl thought for a moment. But she didn't have time to answer, because the maid announced that dinner was ready and the young master and lady were expected at the table. Noticing that it was already late and the sun was beginning to set, Abelia suggested that the young gentleman go into the house. Lucius agreed, but as he left, he looked thoughtfully at that very clover, hoping to find a four-leaf one. The dinner was, as always, magnificent, and everyone devoured the food with pleasure. But the atmosphere at the table was as gloomy as could be. Abelia even felt like she couldn't breathe. "Don't you like the food?" asked Cassis, to which the girl replied that everything was delicious, she just had no appetite. Lucius then asked his father if Lady Abelia would continue to live in the mansion, to which the man replied that nothing had been decided yet, but for now she would stay here. "Lady Abelia, is it true that if you find a four-leaf clover, your wish will come true?" the boy asked breathlessly. Seeing his enthusiasm, the girl already regretted what she had told him. "Young master, these are just fairy tales. In fact, a four-leaf clover does not grant wishes at all," said the lady, and asked Lucius not to look for it. This made the boy noticeably sad and silently bow his head. Standing by the window after dinner, Abelia noticed that it had started to rain quite heavily outside. And out of the corner of her eye she noticed a shadow flashing in the garden, wondering who could be there in such weather. Not the gardener by any chance. But in the next moment, like a flash, realization came. Abelia ran into the garden as fast as she could, into the pouring rain, praying that she was wrong. "Lucius!" the girl screamed when she saw the boy lying on the ground. She tried to rouse the young gentleman, asking what he was doing here in such weather. "Really?" She didn't finish, finally realizing that she was to blame for everything. She asked him not to look for the clover from fairy tales. "Didn't I tell you that he doesn't grant wishes?" Abelia screamed, and bitter tears began to flow down the girl's cheeks. Exhausted by the search, Lucius tried to object, but his voice sounded quiet. "I found it." He held in his hands a green leaf with 4 petals. Despite being very tired, the boy smiled contentedly. The doctor who arrived after examining him said that if the young gentleman rested, the fever would go down by morning. Noticing that it was already late, Cassie suggested that the lady return to her room. "I want to stay with Lucius a little longer. Can I be alone with him?" Abelia asked in a quiet voice. Without answering, the Duke simply nodded silently, giving a sign to the servants. The girl spent the next few hours at the bedside of the child with a fever. "Nanny?" Lucius asked questioningly as he woke up, noticing the girl nearby. But Abelia replied that it was she and told him to continue sleeping peacefully. However, the boy only looked around restlessly, turning his head in different directions as if he was looking for something. "Young master, this is not what you are looking for." The girl handed him a 4-leaf clover. At first, Lucius was surprised, not believing that everything was really happening. And then he smiled happily. Thank God he didn't lose it. "I asked you not to look for it. It's just a plant. It won't fulfill your wish," the girl said, upset. But the boy noticed that she wanted to find it herself, and the girl realized with surprise that he had found it for her. "Yes, so make a wish," Lucius asked happily. However, his words made Abelia even more upset. What did she do? She doesn't deserve this. She's not worthy of love. "Why are you giving it to me?" the girl asked with tears in her eyes. And the boy replied that it was because he wanted her wish to come true, not his. But what is her wish? His words left Abelia stunned. In fact, her deepest desire is to have a family again. Little Seo Yoon's wish, which was shattered into pieces when she was still a child. But is it true? Does she really want to have a family again? Or is it just a need for love? Approaching the boy, she gently stroked his hair. There is only one way to fulfill their wishes with Lucius. "On what business?" the Duke asked without raising his eyes, but after he heard Abelia's voice, he asked what she wanted and suggested that she sit down. "So, what brings you to me?" Cassis asked as the girl settled down on the sofa opposite him. "Regarding the wedding you talked about, I agree to marry you," the girl said directly. Only in exchange for the information about Lucius's father, she asked to make a deal not with the father, but with her directly. When asked why she changed her mind, the girl replied that it was because of Lucius. And when the man asked what he had done, she replied that it was a secret that only she and the young master knew, adding that as soon as the Duke was convinced of the veracity of the information, she would like to divorce him. She had no doubt that Cassis would be able to lift the curse from Lucius. And she will bring Arya so that she can heal him completely, and all this will take 3 years. During this time, it will be possible to remove the curse from Lucius, and she will be able to prepare for an independent life. I am so disgusting to you. Cassis's voice brought her out of her thoughts. Ibelia stared at the man in shock, barely understanding the meaning of his words. Cassis repeated his question. Was he really that disgusting to her? Ibelia sighed and explained that it wasn't that, she just wanted to marry for love. The Duke then asked her where she would go if they got divorced, to which the girl replied that she would think about it later. So what do you say about divorce? Ibelia asked expectantly. And Cassis replied that he needed time to think it over, but he was willing to make a deal with her rather than with Count Barnane. In that case, the girl would like them to sign the contract. The Duke assured that his assistant would prepare the papers, but he would like to discuss the divorce later. Cassis considered their conversation over, but the girl, with all possible sincerity, asked that while they were married she pay more attention to Lucius. I'm already spending time with him, the man immediately replied. Looking down, the girl stated that he really thought so, but his actions said otherwise. Although the Duke says that he devotes time to his son, he himself was sitting at the documents while he was ill. Cassis noted that the doctor thought Lucius simply needed to rest and would not recover any faster if he was around. However, Ibelia began to get angry when she heard such words from the boy's father. Right now, Lucius must be thinking that his father doesn't care about him and has abandoned him, but that's not true. In fact, the Duke is so worried that he can't even concentrate on work. Ibelia thought it was a good offer for the Duke, but the man sincerely did not understand how to properly pay attention, which the girl promised to teach him. To begin with, she suggested putting the documents aside and going to Lucius, which the man did immediately after she left. But he paused slightly, remembering the recent words of the bride sitting in front of him. You're so worried about Lucius that you can't even concentrate on your work. She seemed to look straight into his soul, pulling out even that which he himself did not realize. Cassis understood that Ibelia was right about everything, but he was embarrassed by his own behavior. He acted impulsively after seeing her wounds, and it really would be better for them to divorce when the time came. But she said she hadn't planned anything yet, and where would she go after the divorce? Would she suddenly return to the Barneys again? But why the hell was he so worried about this woman? Lucius's nanny was very surprised to see the gentleman in the boy's room late at night. Cassis immediately made a sign with his hand to her not to wake the boy with the noise. Sit down, the young gentleman was just waiting for you, the nanny said quietly with a smile. Then she wished the gentleman to rest and left him alone with his son. The woman left in a good mood and a little calmer because Lucius remained in the caring hands of his father. The boy was sleeping peacefully, and Lucius moved closer to his bed. The man timidly extended his hand to the peaceful child, and then he took his small palm in his own and squeezed it lightly. This simple movement stirred up memories dear to his heart. Cassis, give me your hand. He literally heard his sister's soft voice. Yes, that was the last time he held her hand. That day he swore to himself that he would protect this child. The baby in his arms smiled at him carefreely, grasping his finger with its small hand. Didn't he keep his promise, but then why is Lucius afraid of him? Maybe because they are father and son. While Cassis was wondering why Lady Ibelia was speaking as if he had actually done something wrong, the boy woke up and opened his eyes with difficulty. Seeing his father nearby, he perked up and wanted to get up, but the Duke told him not to get up and to rest. You came to me, Lucius asked through embarrassment. And the Duke nodded affirmatively, confirming his words. The boy liked his answer very much, and he smiled happily, causing Cassis to look at him questioningly. I'm glad you're here, father, the young gentleman replied sincerely. However, how can one be happy that his father simply came to the bed when he did nothing at all for him? Sleep, it's late, said Cassis, and the boy happily obeyed. A few days later, Ibelia was carefully studying the marriage contract. Including information about the family of Baron Barnane, she read to herself, and these words made her think. Why is there no clause about divorce in the contract? They of course agreed to discuss it later, but it is strange that it is not there at all. Cassis noted that it was precisely because they had agreed to discuss it later that he had not included it in the contract, but the girl insisted on this clause. What shall we do? The Duke's assistant intervened in their conversation when the gentleman and lady were unable to come to an agreement. Add a clause stating that the terms of the divorce will be discussed later. Lady Barnaine compromised. But Cassis remained stubbornly silent, causing both Lady Barnaine and his own assistant to call out to the Duke questioningly. Finally, to the girl's delight, Duke Adelhart ordered his assistant to add this clause, which the servant immediately made a note of in the papers. "And I also left my maid Annie in Count Barnaine's mansion. Is it possible to transfer her here?" the girl asked her assistant, and he promised to do everything possible. The assistant also said that it would take at least 3 months to prepare for the wedding, and during that time they would do everything the gentleman needed, and asked if the lady had any wishes. "Can we have a small wedding?" Ibelia asked. To which the servant replied with embarrassment that it would be difficult, but the girl herself understood this because they needed to take care of the Adelhart's reputation. Then she decided not to interfere. Leaving the servants to do everything at their discretion, the assistant thanked for understanding and left. As soon as the young man left the room, Ibelia asked Cassis if it was okay to speak now, and the Duke replied that he had cast a spell of silence on the room so that no one would hear them. "Then let's get straight to the point. You wanted to know who Lucius's father is," Ibelia began. "He is Prince Lionel Session from the magical kingdom of Session." "Lionel Session?" Duke Adelhart repeated in a changed voice. He couldn't believe that this could be true. The girl thought that in the original Lionel was a womanizer, so it was not surprising that the Duke reacted that way. Lionel was the illegitimate son of the current King of Session, and either because of his resemblance to his father or because of an inferiority complex, he was constantly getting into trouble, which the king was extremely unhappy about. Therefore, the ruler of the Session decided to send his son to study at a magic academy. It was there that he met Julia, Cass's sister. Lionel was very kind to Julia and cherished her, but he hid their relationship, afraid that other people would start pestering her and hurt her. After all, he understood perfectly well that he was the illegitimate son of the king, and he would not be able to protect her from sharp tongues and evil people. And the only person who knew about their secret was Count Barnan. But this turned out to be not the biggest problem. Lionel developed the curse of the royal family of Sessia, and this same curse was passed on to Lucius later. The biggest mystery in the original novel was that Lionel knew about Julia's pregnancy, and he returned to Session to obtain permission to marry, but he never returned from there. Lionel was crazy about Julia, so why didn't he come back? The girl lamented that she never finished reading the novel. After listening to her story, Cassis intended to leave to find out more about it. When the Duke left, Ibelia stretched tiredly and decided to visit Lucius. After all, now she will be able to give this boy the happiness he dreams of. In the corridor, the girl ran into a maid who was carrying a tray of food in her hands. "Is this food for Lucius?" Ibelia asked her, and the maid answered in the affirmative. And then the lady wanted to take it to the boy herself, but the maid was scared because she couldn't allow the lady to do this. "It's okay, I really want to do this." The Duke's bride smiled sincerely. Taking the tray, the girl went into Lucius's room and asked how he was feeling. Lady Ibelia, the young gentleman, at first surprised, soon became inexpressibly happy to see her. The girl asked if the young gentleman was hungry and said that she had brought him something to eat. And when Ibelia, in response to his question whether she had eaten herself, replied that she would do so later, he suggested that she join him. "This is not possible. The chef tried hard and prepared the dish especially for you, so you must eat it all yourself. Then you will quickly recover and grow big and strong," the girl answered. The boy asked again if he ate everything. Would he become as tall as his father? Ibelia thought that Lucius seemed to be more attached to Cassis than she thought, and answered the boy that of course if he ate everything, he would become as tall and strong as the Duke. But when the boy began to devour the food at a tremendous speed, she asked him to eat more slowly. After finishing the meal, Lucius picked up a book that was lying nearby and said that he would like to give Lady Ibelia something. The girl was genuinely surprised that the gift was intended specifically for her. Opening the book, the boy took out a 4-leaf clover lying between the leaves. He had found it for her sake, after all. Ibelia was touched by the young master's action but shook her head. Her wish had already come true, so it was better for him to make his own. "Make a wish yourself?" Lucius asked, puzzled, and the girl asked what he wanted. The boy hesitantly shifted the 4-leaf clover in his hands. "I want you to become my mother, but if you are against it," the child began, afraid to raise his eyes to the lady. However, Ibelia almost immediately replied that she agreed, which surprised him. "I will become your mother." The girl smiled dazzlingly, feeling warmth spreading through her soul. At first, Lucius couldn't believe what she said. But then the child's eyes filled with tears. He was so happy that he promised to try his best to be a good boy, to stop being capricious, and to study etiquette diligently. Seeing that the child had become completely soft, the girl tenderly extended her hands to Olia. "You don't have to be a good boy," the lady said, causing the child's eyes to widen in surprise. As Abelia hugged him, she told him that he deserved to be loved simply for existing. Lucius asked how she was, if she was happy to become his mother. "Of course I'm happy," Abelia asked, hugging the boy tighter. She is always happy when she is near him. Meanwhile, Duke Adelhart sat in the gloomy semi-darkness of his office, digesting the information he had received. Lionel Session, at the mention of this name, the man's fists clenched, and days gone by came flooding back to his memory. "Who is he, Julia? Why hasn't he returned yet?" Cassis was very indignant and worried about his sister. But she replied that he promised to return after he received permission to marry, and that his family was probably against their wedding, which is why he was delayed. The brother knew it was a lie. What family would not like the proposal to marry the Duchess of Adelhard? "This bastard knows you're pregnant," the young man asked, barely containing his anger. In response, Julia asked not to call him a scumbag, and added that he, of course, knew, and left for his homeland as soon as he found out about her pregnancy. They decided to name their daughter Lucia and their son Lucius. These beautiful names were invented by the child's father himself. "So please take care of our child until he comes back," the girl asked her younger brother with a happy smile. The future Duke Adelhart did not understand why his sister was still waiting for that man. And now, with the new information, he realized that all this time the father was the prince of the magical kingdom of Cessia, the same prince who was rumored to be a bastard and a headache for the royal family. How dare he? Cassis was angry and ordered Logan to gather all available information about the royal family of Cessia and Prince Lionel, and also to find out if Count Barnan and the royal family of Cessia were connected in any way. Having accepted the order, the assistant added that he would also prepare a letter for the Earl of Barnan and deal with the demands that the lady had put forward. Having finished his business, when it was already completely dark, Cassis slowly headed to the library.